Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition, and we turn now to the amazing poem 371, A Precious Mouldering Pleasure 'Tis. Now, there are people who will argue that Emily's stuff is so sad, it's so depressing, it's always about death and dying. I gothic, I can't get into it. I mean, it just bothers me. And when I hear that, I will often say, well, I mean, there's one or two poems, as we've already seen, that are a little bit challenging, but a poem like this tells us, oh no, Emily's got a whole different range of emotional views, and here, this will be one of the great celebration poems of reading. And it in some ways will fit in with Chapman's Homer, Keats's Chapman's Homer, much have I traveled in the realms of gold and many goodly states and kingdoms seen. We've given full lectures on that one at learnstrong.net. Now, this is the first poem that will reveal for Emily the importance of books. And notice we're 371 poems in. We're going to see three more that will, in fact, do the same thing of celebration. When it was published in 1890, it was actually called In a Library for reasons that will become self-evident. Our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've worked with our set of introductory comments as well as the preceding 370 poems. We just finished with 370, Heaven is So Far of the Mind. Now, one of the great questions in Emily's scholarship is, what did she read? Like, where did she come up with all these amazing ideas that she keeps playing with? Some will say that she never really read much of anything, and therefore she is genius because she came up with these ideas on her own. Others will say, no, actually, she did read, and quite a bit, and she was able to take that reading, as we have said about Milton and other great poets, to take that information and somehow adapt it to speak to the present and even to the future, obviously, in our time as well. Let's enjoy the poem and her view of great reading. A precious mouldering pleasure 'tis to meet an antique book in just the dress his century wore, a privilege, I think, his venerable hand to take, and warming in our own a passage back or two to make, to times when he was young, his quaint opinions to inspect, his thought to ascertain, on themes concern our mutual mind, the literature of man. What interested scholars most, what competitions ran, when Plato was a certainty, when Sophocles a man, when Sappho was a living girl, and Beatrice wore the gown that Dante deified, facts centuries before. He traverses familiar, as one should come to town and tell you all your dreams were true. He lived where dreams were born. His presence is enchantment. You beg him not to go. Old volumes shake their vellum heads and tantalize just so. Now, those who are bibliophiles and love reading and love books often will say this is their favorite Emily poem. She will, of course, begin with this word, precious. We saw it in poem 146. We'll see it again in 727 and 901. We'll especially see it in 940 and 1587. When we come to those passages, we'll come back to her use of the word precious. A good book is precious. I mean, those of you who are already marking up closely and annotating closely your Johnson edition of the complete poems of Emily Dickinson, and we're only now soon to be 400 poems in, you're already saying this volume means something to me really important because, well, I'm going to hold on to it. It is those marks, we were talking about this in an earlier poem, weren't we? Those marks made by another person. In Emily's case, of course, it was someone that she lost. But those marks begin to matter. Why? Because books are precious. She'll call it a mouldering pleasure. Mouldering is interesting. In 169 we saw it. In 607 it's the mouldering playmate. Mouldering is fascinating because it mold as in old, but also mold as in to transform or to change, as in I'm molded by the stuff that I read. And some of you will report our study of Emily is starting to do this. It's precious to meet an antique book. When we get to poem 1545, we'll play around with this idea of antique, and this is the way it will read when we get there. The Bible is an antique volume written by fated men at the suggestion of holy specters, subjects, Bethlehem, Eden, the ancient homestead, Satan the brigadier, Judas the great defaulter, David the troubadour. Sin, a distinguished precipice others must resist. Boys that believe are very lonesome, other boys are lost. Had but the tale a warbling teller, all the boys would come. Orpheus's sermon captivated, it did not condemn. And when we get to poem 1514, she'll say it this way: an antiquated tree is cherished of the crow, because that junior foliage is disrespectful now to venerable birds. So notice antiquated and venerable both being used in this poem. Whose corporation coat would decorate oblivion's remotest consulate. So she says, a precious mouldering pleasure 'tis to meet an antique book in just the dress his century wore. Notice, not her century, but rather his century wore. A privilege, I think. Privilege is used in 22 different poems. It's this I think that made us call this series Chats with Emily. There's such a conversational tone in this poem, and I love it for that reason. This is kind of what I think. I think that a really good book is precious, especially a book from long ago. She'll continue by talking about the author, and she'll use his, but interestingly, reference Sappho and Beatrice here in a little bit. His venerable hand, back to poem 1514, right, with venerable, right? Notice the language of respect in this poem. I love this, that fact. His venerable hand to take. This takes us back to our study of Walt Whitman's Song of the Open Road, you'll remember, and others, this idea of give me your hand. You'll remember from passage Song of Myself 46, right? I know I have the best of time and space. It was never measured and never will be measured. Remember that where he says, give me your hand, right, as we go on this journey. His venerable hand to take. There's an intimacy, can I say it that way? There's an intimacy for Emily in terms of how she reads. And if we could sit and chat with her, we have to imagine that one of the places we'd end up going pretty quickly is, what have you read? And she would become animated, and she'd start talking about her Milton or whatever, Shakespeare or whatever, her Keats or Browning, right? Elizabeth Barrett Browning or Robert Browning. And she would begin to talk about how there's, I get to hold on to his hand, and warming in our own a passage back, right? I love the word passage because, of course, it makes us think of Odyssey, and therefore it makes us think of traveling, and that immediately makes us think of Keats and obviously Chapman's Homer, right? A passage back or two to make to times when he was young. The idea that, you know, when you're reading, you're discovering. I mean, think of it. While we're reading this poem and all of our Emily poems, we're going back to a time where Emily, this genius living in Amherst, is able to somehow touch with everything that came before. We have often said in our study of Yeats' Sailing to Byzantium that final line of what is past or passing or to come, that is exactly what great art always does, right? Monuments of an aging intellect, he'll call it in that poem. His quaint opinions, it's fun. In other words, we look back and we sometimes will roll our eyes or say, oh, that's so innocent and quaint. To inspect. This takes us to Bacon's of Studies and our study there of how to read, right? Reading maketh a full man, right, he will say. And then we're only supposed to taste some books, but fully to digest others. And here there's a certain kind of inspection that we get to have. His thought to ascertain on themes, notice capitalized, concern our mutual mind. This is what great reading does. I think really digesting, no pun intended, digesting a poem like this reminds us of what it is we're trying to do, guys, while we're reading these poems and anything else that we read, right? We're trying to somehow entertain, right? To be able to ascertain. We're trying to find the mutual mind, and then she'll say it, the literature of man. Again, it's fascinating that she'll say man and not women, because she's about to get to Sappho in a little bit, right? What interested Socrates, by the way, we get several of these, what, and then when. What interested scholars most, right? We'll get to Sophocles in a little bit. What interested scholars most? What competitions ran when Plato was a certainty and Sophocles a man? It's interesting that it's not Socrates, but Sophocles, right? And we've commented on the power and the importance of Sophocles. Think about Matthew Arnold's Dover Beach, Sophocles heard it, the sound of the sea long ago in the Aegean, and it brought to mind the turbid ebb and flow of human misery. Sophocles, the great writer of course, the trilogy that haunts us still, from Oedipus to Oedipus and Colonus to obviously Antigone. And Sophocles, a man, when Sappho was a living girl, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, Emily's going to throw out that brilliant female writer as well. And Beatrice wore the gown. It's interesting that she mentions the gown, given the dress, given what we know about Emily. Beatrice, the gown that Dante deified, facts centuries before. We have, of course, given full lectures on Dante's Divine Commedia and the importance of Beatrice as being the muse, the inspiration, right? It also tells us, obviously, that she loved to read these thinkers, Plato and Sophocles, obviously Sappho and Beatrice and Dante, right? And then to finish, he traverses, we're back from passage to traverse, familiar as one should come to town. I love this word picture. Some have equated this with Emerson, who visited Amherst. We're not sure whether she ever actually met Emerson or not, but the Emerson who comes to town to visit and tell you all your dreams were true. This is what great writers do. Whatever it is that you've dreamed, somehow a great writer reminds us that the new is the new. The NEW is the KNEW in some profound way. He lived where dreams were born. I mean, what an amazing... If we want to say what makes Emily genius, it's this, that she lived where dreams were born. And so many of you have commented on this fact that when you're reading these poems, it's like she's saying things you already knew, but you had forgotten, or you couldn't put it in the language that maybe she's playing with. His presence is enchantment. She'll use this 3 more times in 838, 1299, and 1353. Enchantment. It's almost like a magic spell. You beg him not to go. All right? This is what great reading is. Old volumes shake their vellum heads and tantalize. Only time she ever uses that word in all of her poetry. Just so. I cannot help but think of Whitman's Song of the Open Road, my old delicious burdens. The idea that there's a certain thing about reading great works that will tantalize us. We want more of it, even though, obviously, we never can fully get what we want, and that's what makes it so much fun. At 2A, I think the messages here are obvious, right? That great texts are a great delight, and the artists that produce those texts must be respected by us, even though at times their ideas are quaint, and we might even argue within our own culture perceived as less than, right? And yet there's something profound about reading great thinkers and great works. At 2B, I love the language of respect, mouldering, antique, privilege, venerable, warming, right? Enchantment, tantalize. Now, when we get to poem 604, we will definitely come back to this poem again. She'll say it this way: unto my books, so good to turn, far ends of tired days, it half endears the abstinence and pain is missed in praise, as flavors cheer retarded guests with banquetings to be. So spices stimulate the time till my small library, it may be wilderness without far feet of failing men, but holiday excludes the night, and it is bells within. I think these kinsmen of the shelf, what a great line, these kinsmen of the shelf, their countenances kid, enamor in perspective and satisfy untamed. Right, the key, right? Great reading is always about satisfaction. When we get to poem 1263, she'll say it this way: there is no frigate like a book to take us lands away, nor any coursers like a page of prancing poetry. Amazing line. This traverse may the poorest take without oppressive toll. How frugal is the chariot that bears the human soul. And then 1587. As well, she'll say it this way, and again we'll come back to this poem as well. He ate and drank the precious words, his spirit grew robust. He knew no more that he was poor, nor that his frame was dust. He danced along the dingy days, and this bequest of wings was but a book. What liberty a loosened spirit brings. It is, and for scholars, it has always been the case that scholars love to kind of speculate on books. The great Whisker, the formulator of one of the first great biographies, will say it this way in chapter 12 of his classic, There Was a Poet, Books and Reading. All her life, Emily Dickinson was an eager reader. Books, however, were not her masters, but her friends. She turned to them because they offered solace and transport for the far ends of tired days. Her attitude was Emersonian. A poet's first business was less with the literature of old than with the impressions of life thronging about him. Nevertheless, she cherished her small library of favorites as a resource when her imagination flagged. They brought her inspiration and stimulus. No English-speaking poet since Chaucer has written more engagingly than she in praise of books. I love that he says it that way. To finish, and to own a poem like this, what's your view of great books? What are your favorites? I hope Emily's one of them. Thank you.